A seething cauldron of tension, turmoil, hatred, violence, and bloodshed. No region on earth seems so volatile, so unpredictable, so filled with the potential for disaster. Will this conflict ever be resolved? What's ahead for the Middle East? This week on The World Tomorrow, Richard Ames.
When the subject of the Middle East is brought up, we immediately think of so many questions we'd like to have answered, such as why the rise of violence in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? Will there be another war between the Arabs and Israelis? Will the two superpowers be drawn into the struggle, leading to a major confrontation, maybe even a nuclear World War III? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will peace ever come to this war-torn land? This week on the World Tomorrow program, we begin a two-part series on the Middle East. We're going to give you a fresh perspective on this troubled region and how its problems could very well affect us in the not-too-distant future. We'll also take into consideration a vital source of information on the past, present, and even the future of the Middle East. That source, believe it or not, is the Bible. Because you see, the Bible does contain much historical information about this area, as well as many prophecies concerning future events. The area we call the Middle East is the cradle of Western civilization. The people of this region share a common heritage, and yet they are bitterly divided by thousands of years of tradition and history. The problems are complex, some are unique, and they are all difficult to understand, especially for those of us not caught up in the conflict. Most of us think of the struggle as a battle between Arab and Israeli over disputed territory, but the Middle East is not so simple. We see Jew versus Jew, Arab against Arab, Christian and Muslim fighting each other, as well as Muslim against Muslim. There are fundamentalists confronting moderates and each other. Normal solutions just don't work here, because this conflict is fueled by misperception, grudges, quarrels, and misunderstandings from over 2,500 years of history. The focus of world attention recently is the increasing violence between the Palestinian Arabs and the Israeli troops in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Palestinians are demanding an independent homeland, and the Israelis refuse to withdraw from the territories they've occupied since 1967. As the bloodshed continues to escalate, both sides have become more adamant in their resolve not to back down. What has caused these flare-ups? Why should these territories have to be the center of so much trouble? And why is the state of Israel, 40 years old this year, still fighting to maintain its very existence? To understand, we must go back to the years just before the First World War, when the map of the Middle East looked very different. Palestine had been a part of the old Turkish Empire for nearly 400 years. But the Arabs, a people keenly aware of their heritage, were waiting to shake off the Turkish rule. As World War I broke out, they once again dreamed of an Arab empire. Meanwhile, nationalistic yearnings had also been growing among the Jews of Europe. They were strangers, misunderstood, and often the victims of persecution. Deep inside the heart of many Jews was the yearning to one day return to their promised land. Late in the 19th century, such hopes were rekindled by the writings of Theodor Herzl. He painted a vivid picture of Zion, a place that Jews could call their own. In the late 19th century, anti-Semitism was renewed, and the resurgence of pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe caused nearly 3 million Jews to leave Eastern Europe. Most emigrated to the New World, but thousands went to Palestine. At first, the Jewish immigrants were outnumbered by the Palestinian Arab population. There seemed to be room for everyone, and under the Turkish rulers, Arab and Jew lived together in relative harmony. But how did this modern Middle East crisis begin? It began with a series of hasty promises and treaties made during the First World War. The Arabs were persuaded to join the British in fighting the Turkish Empire. In return, the British promised the Arabs independence when the war was won. In 1918, the Turks were defeated, and the British tried to honor their agreements. The old Ottoman Empire was divided into various states, but Palestine, with its Jewish and Arab population, proved a difficult problem. The British government had made certain agreements with the Arabs of Palestine, who had helped them fight against Turkey. But they had also, in the controversial Balfour Declaration of 1917, promised the Jews a national home in Palestine. The British now found themselves in the awkward position of having promised the same piece of territory to both Jews and Arabs. In the early 1920s, the eastern half of Palestine became the Kingdom of Jordan under Abdullah, the grandfather of King Hussein of Jordan. The British, meanwhile, continued to occupy the western part of Palestine, governing it under a mandate from the League of Nations. The Nazi persecutions led to another wave of Jewish immigration into Palestine, and by 1939, they formed 30% of the population, and tensions rose. Amid mounting turmoil, the British asked the newly formed United Nations to resolve the problem. In 1947, the United Nations voted in favor of partition, the creation of the State of Israel as a homeland for the Jews, with the West Bank becoming a homeland for the Palestinian Arabs. On May 14, 1948, the British forces withdrew, and the modern State of Israel was born. Within hours, Arab armies invaded. It seemed that Israel would be strangled at birth, but the Jews fought with a determination born of desperation. After more than a year and a half of fighting, the Jewish War of Independence ended on January 7, 1949 by UN mediation. Israel had survived. But the tension remained, and with the continual animosity existed the ever-present threat that war would break out again, and it did. 3 more wars were fought between Israel and her Arab neighbors. In 1956, after Egypt nationalized and blocked the Suez Canal, Israel temporarily occupied the Sinai Peninsula. Again, in 1967, after Egypt blockaded the Gulf of Aqaba, Israel struck back in what has been called the Six-Day War. As a result, Israel captured the West Bank, the Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, and the Sinai. After routing the Arab armies on all fronts, Israel seemed invincible. But their confidence was shattered in 1973 when Israel reeled under a surprise attack by Syria and Egypt on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. Again, Israel rallied and the Arab forces retreated. Then a remarkable event occurred in this land so filled with strife and conflict. On November 20th, 1977, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat made an historic trip to Jerusalem, not to make war, but to make peace. Following the Camp David Accords on March 26, 1979, President Anwar Sadat and Prime Minister Menachem Begin signed a peace treaty with President Carter at the White House. 2 months later, Israel returned the Sinai to Egyptian control, and despite President Sadat's gesture to make peace, it cost him his life. He was assassinated by extremist Muslim soldiers on October 6, 1981. Today, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem still remain in Israeli hands. Israel says that it cannot relinquish control of any of the territory it occupied after the '67 war until its security and right to exist is guaranteed by all its neighbors. However, most of Israel's Arab neighbors consider not only these areas to be occupied territory, but all the state of Israel as well. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Arabs of the West Bank and Gaza Strip are caught in the middle, and their patience is waning. They see no progress and no hope of a solution. A moderate voice amid the shouting and the shooting is Jordan's ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Kamal, ambassador of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and himself a Palestinian.
Well, as you are aware, the Palestinian problem is almost 40 years now. It's 1948, 88. And those people in Gaza and West Bank have been under military occupation for the past 20 years. And many attempts were made to resolve the question with no avail. And people realizing the frustration, the unhappiness they have been living in, and the humiliation and so on, and realizing that the Arab states, for one reason or another, the situation in the area is not helpful, they have decided to take the problem themselves in their own hands. It was a spontaneous uprising. It was absolutely innocent. It was not incited from abroad. And it was a reflection of the sad situation in which these people have been living through during the past 20 years.
An expert on the present Palestinian problem is Dr. Yahya Sadowski. Dr. Sadowski is a research associate in foreign policy studies at Brookings Institution. It is a private nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., devoted to independent research, education, and publications on important issues of domestic and foreign policy. One of our senior staff writers, Keith Stump, spoke with Dr. Sadowski.
Well, it appears that the real key to the problem at the moment is simply a loss of hope on the behalf of the Palestinians inside the occupied territories. There were a series of events over the past 6 months that apparently convinced people that it simply was no longer prudent to wait for parties on the outside to resolve their problems. But until you've lived for a while without a passport, without a country that you belong to, without any place of refuge and so on, I don't think you will understand either why the Palestinians are so desperate today, or for that matter, why the Jews and the Zionist movement were so desperate in the 1930s and 1940s.
Both sides have reached a stalemate. They cannot make progress, dare not go back, and will not stand still. And any attempt by outsiders to impose a quick solution on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is viewed as unrealistic and doomed to failure. We talked with Eitan Ben-Sur, Consul General of Israel in Los Angeles, concerning the explosive situation in Israel.
But I think that the problem is one of the region, and the solution has to emanate from the region itself. And it is primarily and foremost of a problem for the people who live in the area, and they have to work out a good neighborly relations and to enter into the process of negotiation in order to arrive at an agreement as soon as possible. And that's why we have to see the political process going as soon as possible in order to avoid and prevent any further bloodshed.
There's a great deal of bitterness. The Arabs feel humiliated and frustrated and bitter. And this is building up. And it is allowed to build up with the increasing number, their numbers, and frustration, and you can't realize what will be the outcome of all this. And so time is not on the side of peace. So unless the forces of moderation, coexistence, and peace work together, I think we are heading for disaster in that part of the world.
This land that is the center of so much tension today is also the land of the Bible, where the events of the Old and New Testament took place. The Bible has much to say about the origins and early history of these peoples, but what many do not understand is that it also has much to say about their future. The future of the Middle East may seem unpredictable, but it has been predicted with remarkable accuracy in the pages of Bible prophecy. So we've prepared this important new free booklet to help you understand the Middle East in Prophecy. It's one of the most thorough and comprehensive pieces of literature we've ever offered on this program. This booklet shows how past history makes the present situation understandable. It also shows how Bible prophecy describes the course of future events. My friends, we need to realize in the years ahead, the Middle East is going to affect every one of us no matter where we live. We need to understand the magnitude and importance of the events that are going to occur there. That's why we want you to have this brand new booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. Like all of our literature, this booklet is free of charge. We never have anything to sell on this program. And if you're not already a subscriber, we will also send you a free trial subscription to the Plain Truth magazine for as long as you want. For over 50 years, the Plain Truth has given its readers a unique insight into the meaning behind the news. I'll be offering the Plain Truth magazine and the Middle East in Prophecy again at the end of today's program. Now let's continue with our program, Middle East in Perspective. In order for us to really understand the Middle East situation, there's another factor we must take into consideration: the religious significance of the area. The three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all place great emphasis on Jerusalem. Despite their differences, these three religions have much in common. They all worship one God. Jews and Christians share a common heritage in the scriptures of the Old Testament. Muslims accept Jesus as a prophet, although not as the Son of God. All three faiths look to the return of the Messiah, or a Mahdi, to appear suddenly and bring world peace. And significantly, all three look to Jerusalem as a holy city. Jerusalem means city of peace, but today it's anything but peaceful. The religious tensions now rising will prove to be a much greater problem than the political troubles that are making the news today. Perhaps there was a time when the Middle East situation could have been stabilized by resolving the political questions of nationalism and national security. But now another force must be considered. It's an influence and power that will have a far greater impact on future events. It's the force of Islamic and Jewish fundamentalism. Robin Wright is a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She has covered the Middle East from both sides and has been recognized for her exceptional reporting from all regions of the world.
It would have been unthinkable a decade ago, but today religion increasingly plays an important, key role in Middle East politics, both domestically and regionally. It is evident not only among Muslims, but also among a growing percentage of Israeli Jews. One of the interesting facts, little noticed in the West, is the fact the Palestinian uprising actually grew out of Islamic fervor in Gaza. So it can be argued that Islamic fundamentalism has already played a key role in mobilizing the Palestinians.
Well, it's important, I think, to understand that Islam is a kind of language in which peoples of the Middle East and other regions express their solidarity with one another, their aspirations to a just society, and their common resistance to foreign intervention has been a force in the region since the 16th century or even earlier. However, over the past 40 years or so, something new has appeared. A number of small Islamically oriented groups that we call Islamists have appeared in countries like Egypt, Pakistan, more recently in Syria and Iran and other kinds of locations, which not only share a common attachment to Islam as a general set of ideas, but have a very specific ideology that calls for the development of an Islamic state through a very specific organizational instrument, small groups which organize a kind of Muslim underground within society to work for the propagation of Islamic ideals. That Islamism is a new force in the Middle East, to be distinguished from the broader background of Islamic sentiment, and one that's potentially very, very potent.
In the light of the recent rise of religious fervor in the area, there's another important question that we must ask. Will the religious issues become an even more dangerous factor in the Middle East than the political issues?
I think they're both very dangerous, and I think that there is even a possibility that in the near future, the two traditional conflicts will become one. They will, in effect, merge. Up until this point, they've had different dynamics and different momentum. But because of the Palestinian uprising, because of the inability of either the traditional Palestinian PLO or the Israeli state to find some kind of agreement, that you will find people on both sides of the conflict turn increasingly to religion as a banner of supplementary opposition.
If the current conflict should become a holy war, the consequences could be disastrous. No war is so vicious, no enemy so determined as those caught up in a war between opposing religions. In a religious war, treaties and negotiations mean nothing. The forces of moderation and balance are cast aside. Emotion rules. Martyrdom is even welcome. We've already seen the results of the extremist faction of Islamic fundamentalism in many acts of terrorism. But now we're seeing evidence of a dramatic new force. Jewish fundamentalism and it threatens to further complicate the already confused Middle Eastern scene.
The Jewish fundamentalist movement emerged in the mid-70s out of a small group of rabbis and religious students who believed that now it is time to recreate the kingdom of Israel and to lead Israel back to national salvation or redemption, open the way for the Messiah. It's interesting because they've redefined the whole conflict of 40 years around religious issues. It is no longer for them a dispute over territorial borders or national security, but one that centers on a God-given mission based on the deal struck 5 millennia ago between Abraham and God.
A confrontation between fundamentalist Islam and Judaism makes this area one of the most potentially dangerous places on earth. And no place is quite so explosive as the Temple Mount in Old Jerusalem. On this site, the great temples of Solomon and Herod once stood. Today, only the stones of the old platform remain, the famous Western Wall or Wailing Wall, holiest shrine in Judaism. On the Temple Mount stands the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Shrine of Omar, commonly called the Dome of the Rock, where tradition has it that the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Muslims pray on the top, the Jews over to the side. But fundamentalists among the Jews are beginning to demand a presence upon the mount itself, a situation that could ignite Islamic passions and produce a situation that could get quickly out of control. This then is the tragedy of the area. It seems so complicated, but deep down it is a quarrel between ordinary people who are the victims of circumstance they can no longer control, centuries of hatred, prejudice, and misunderstanding.
People in the Middle East want exactly the same things we do. They want to be able to live their lives more or less uninterrupted and uninterfered with. They want to be able to raise their children, make a decent living, etc.
If there's goodwill, if there is love for peace, all these problems could be easily solved. But if everybody sits to his piece of the pie or cake and sticks to his guns and expresses no flexibility, things will come from bad to worse.
Peace will bring not only the end of belligerency and bloodshed and unnecessary sacrifices, but also prosperity, well-being to Israel, to the Arab countries, to the Palestinians, to the region, and to the entire world.
But the peace that all sides deeply desire will be hard to achieve. The Bible predicts that Jerusalem will become the focal point of a crisis that would threaten every man, woman, and child on earth. The prophet Zechariah wrote over 25 centuries ago in Zechariah 12 and verse 2, "I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem." Looking through time, Jesus of Nazareth prophesied that trouble in Jerusalem would signal the beginning of cataclysmic events that would shake the world. In Luke 21, verse 20, he said, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near." And in verse 22, "For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." Prophecies like these seem to indicate that the dream of peacemakers will be thwarted. More trouble lies ahead. But this is not the whole story. Lasting peace will eventually come to the Middle East. And how it will come to the Middle East is the subject of our program next week. In the meantime, you need to read this brand new booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. This booklet will help you understand those events as never before, what the fighting is all about, what the historical implications are, and what will happen next. Chapter 1, The Seed of Abraham, outlines the common heritage of the Arab and Jewish peoples. Chapter 2 examines the rise and expansion of the Islamic religion. Chapter 3 traces the seeds of the modern-day Middle East conflict from the time of World War I. Chapter 4 shows from Bible prophecy where these heated passions will eventually lead, and the startling events that will ultimately affect the whole world. This 48-page booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy, is one of the most thorough, comprehensive booklets we've ever offered. You need to know what lies ahead in the future. The Middle East in Prophecy is absolutely free of charge. Be sure to request your personal copy. And if you're not already a subscriber, we'll also be sending you a free trial subscription to the Plain Truth magazine for as long as you want. Printed in 7 languages, the Plain Truth is read by millions of people worldwide. Today you need a news magazine that tells you not only what is happening, but why it's happening. And even more importantly, where it's all leading. This magazine gives you an overview and understanding of world events in the light of Bible prophecy. It also covers topics concerning social issues and gives you information on how to cope in this modern world. Now, we've nothing to sell on the World Tomorrow program. All of our literature is yours free for the asking, free of charge, no cost, no obligation whatsoever. We're simply not going to ask you for money. So, for a free subscription to the Plain Truth and this free booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy, please telephone for the cost of a local call, 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. Or if you prefer to write, then send your request to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Next week on The World Tomorrow, we'll continue to discuss the future of the Middle East as outlined in Bible prophecy. Now, we've been covering a perspective of how the Middle East situation stands today. But where are all these events heading in the future? As Bible prophecy predicts, events in the Middle East will play a more and more critical role in the course of world affairs. Some shocking and unexpected events are about to occur. You need to know about them. Don't miss next week's provocative program, The Middle East in Prophecy. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Richard Ames for The World Tomorrow.
For the free literature offered on this program, write to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. The preceding program and all literature were produced and sponsored by the Worldwide Church of God.